This is Radio Chatskill. I'm Tim Bruno. In the mid-1800s, America had a blossoming wine industry. Native and hybrid grapes were praised by wine growers for their extraordinary flavors and natural resilience. But then Prohibition swept through, and these valuable varieties fell by the wayside. Located in the Catskills, Dear Native Grapes is a project dedicated to restoring America's native and hybrid grapes with wine growing methods modeled after holistic and regenerative philosophies, applying both on the farm and also in the cellar. Aaron Shearer spoke to the folks behind Dear Native Grapes for the latest installment of Eating Upstate.
When you think of the varieties of grapes that are made into wine, names like Black Eagle, Golden Drop, and Delaware might not be familiar to the average wine consumer, but Deanna Urcioli and Elfie Alcantara are out to change that. Their Delaware County winery, Dear Native Grapes, focuses on Catskill and Hudson Valley heirloom varieties. They are also among the farmers that suffered severe crop damage as a result of the May 18th freeze. In part one, I spoke to Michael Migliore, owner of White Cliff Vineyard and Winery and president of the Hudson Valley Wine and Grape Association, about the struggles some of the wine growers locally faced as a result of the May 18th freeze from a region-wide standpoint. In part two, I speak to Deanna Urcioli and Elfie Alcantara about Dear Native Grapes, its unique mission, and the damage they suffered as part of the May 18th freeze. Deanna Urcioli and Elfie Alcantara met while studying film at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. After graduation, they moved in together and took up gardening in their apartment and also developed a passion for wine.
We started tasting wines from places that we had never heard about, that we had no idea were producing wine, and just being really surprised by some of these flavors and aromas that we never thought were possible in wine before. Places like, little countries in Eastern Europe, regions in even Spain and Italy that we'd never heard of before, and from grapes that were native to those regions in particular. And so that's kind of when we really started opening our eyes to some of the possibilities of natural wine, because most of these are wines that were coming from small producers. They were fermented fully with their own native yeasts, many of them coming from organic vineyards, biodynamic vineyards. So we really started to really go down that path, and kind of seeing what was out there.
We just loved what we were drinking, from start to finish. We were always surprised. We were always delighted. And so, in thinking of like our own farm project, our own vineyard project, we wanted to kind of model some of those more like holistic and organic practices.
At the beginning of 2018, they realized that there was a way to bring their love of gardening and wine together, and made the decision to launch their own winery. They decided to save money by moving into a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, and Elfie worked harvests in the Hudson Valley.
So, Elfie and I have always wanted to have some sort of farm project. Early in our relationship, we both had green thumbs, and we were trying to figure out, well, how could we maybe explore that? Work with nature, work with the earth. And it kind of just coincided with this kind of passion for natural wine and learning about natural wine. And so the two just kind of like merged into, well, instead of it just being like a farm produce project, why don't we make it a vineyard project? And that was kind of like the first jump where we were like, okay, why don't we bring these two passions together?
We were also kind of getting burnt out from our film jobs in the city. We were living in a very cramped apartment, packing our small little balcony, whatever plants we could be able to grow there in Brooklyn where we were living. And we just wanted to, we both love to grow things and love nature in general. And so I would mostly just complain to Deanna quite a bit. And I was like, well, how can we do it so that we can have more access to nature? How can we get out into the country? I would complain a lot, and Deanna was the one that kind of pushed us to put a plan into action. And she was like, okay, I'm tired of hearing you complain. Why don't we start saving up for maybe some farmland in the future? And And, why don't you go apprentice or learn from wine growers or winemakers, kind of like put everything into action. And that was around 2018 or 20.
Yeah, end of 2017,
yeah,
early 2018, because it was definitely like, you can't really see the vision when you're kind of in your apartment and you're like, oh, it feels like so far away, but we just both needed a good like kick in the butt to get started. And so once we started reaching out to other like winemakers in the region, and we started putting away money to potentially like buy some farmland, like it felt very active, like we were doing things. And that's when we started taking trips all around New York State to understand, what is each county like? What kind of agrarian lifestyles do they offer?
What are people doing?
Yeah, what are the communities like? And so that was at the end of 2018 that we started taking those trips. And it wasn't until 2019 that we were like, okay, we have enough for like a down payment. Let's get really serious about this. And let's start like really looking at Zillow, talking to real estate agents, and seeing what's out there.
And it was around then that we really started learning about native and hybrid grapes. And that's when our eyes were really open. We were instantly hooked by the story of America's native grapes. And we were like, whoa, we can do this. And we can do this in New York, which is where our community is, where our families are. Because at first we didn't know where this project was going to be. And when we realized that America had all these amazing grape varieties that grew perfectly well in this climate, that were just suited to this part of the world, we were like, wow, let's go for that and let's explore that whole idea.
In 2019, they bought a farm outside of Walton, New York. In the midst of the pandemic the following year, they planted their first vines. In addition to the heirloom grape varieties I mentioned at the beginning, they also grow hybrids that originate from Minnesota, such as Marquette and Petite Pearl.
Super interesting to see how, as time passes, what's working and what's not,
Yeah, I think that's why we planted so many varieties. I think we have closer to like 30 varieties right now. And there are some that will do really well on our site and others that might struggle. And, the goal is not to grow everything, but just to see what likes it here. We do have a very cold, harsh climate in the winter. The site is very exposed, gets a lot of wind. So, these first few years are really like an experiment to see what wants to be here, what's going to grow here. And once we identify those, we'll plant more of that variety.
Grapevines can take 3 to 4 years to bear their first fruit. That hasn't stopped them from producing wine, however. In 2021, they made their first vintage, sourcing organically farmed native varieties like Catawba, Isabella, and Delaware from Buzzard Crest Vineyard, located on Keuka Lake in the Finger Lakes region. The vintage was released in February of this year and sold out quickly. More recently, they released Best Summer Ever, a Pet Nat sparkling wine made with Delaware grapes and co-fermented with goldenrod honey made at the Rogers Ranch in Hamden. This fall, they will release a Cayuga White, a hybrid variety bred by Cornell and first released in 1972. The Cayuga White was fermented by skin contact, which is sometimes referred to as an orange wine due to its amber hue. They will also release 2 wines made from native varieties, a sparkling Niagara made in a light traditional style, and a rosé made from Isabella grapes.
Well, we got very lucky that year in 2021. We thought we would wait a little bit longer for our vineyard to come into fruition, but Alfie is always doing his research, doing his homework, and he came across a posting for one of these vineyards that was looking to sell some of their native and hybrid varieties. And Alfie was like, oh my God, these are the same varieties we're growing and they're farming them organically. Like, we should get some and start making wine. And even if it's a test, even if it's a trial for ourselves, like it would behoove us to like start and figure out our own practices and our own workflows. And so we reached out to that one vineyard to say, hey, we saw your listing. We'd love to buy some of these grapes. And they're a small family run vineyard on Keuka Lake. And they were just, only too happy to work with us. And so we've only sourced from that vineyard because of the heritage of the grapes and because of their organic practices.
2023 would have marked the first year they would have been able to do a complete harvest from their vineyard, but the May 18th freeze devastated their crop. Although they will be harvesting a small amount from their own vineyard this year, they plan on working with their growers in the Finger Lakes once again. In addition, they are also teaming up with Hudson Valley wine grower Stephen Castles to produce a wine made from Hudson Valley heirloom grapes.
I think we were close to, temperature-wise, we probably got close to the 20 Fahrenheit. So it was very cold, very fast. We had varieties that had, because of our warm spring, were very well advanced, like the Marquette and the Itasca. And those got basically 80 to 90% primary shoots were badly damaged and lost. And the interesting thing is that a lot of growers, were saying that some of these hybrid varieties, they have so much vigor that they'll usually put us out a secondary shoot, a secondary bud, if the primary one suffers. But the crazy thing is we didn't see any secondary bud come back in many of these trunks. Granted, our vines are still pretty young. They're on their third year. So the trunks are still pretty, pretty small. So we believe that there might have been vascular damage within the trunk that probably killed the secondary bud too. And so what we're seeing now is that the plant is putting out brand new shoots kind of closer to the base. And so we were definitely expecting fruit in some of those, and we're definitely not going to see that this year.
Yeah. I'd say about out of the entire vineyard, 70% of primary shoot loss. And so we won't see fruit from those this year. I think only 30% or so made it through because of their late budding nature.
And that's the Petit Pearl and the Frontenac. Those were pretty much untouched, which was interesting.
Yeah.
As they build out their winery, Deanna and Elfie have continued to work jobs in film and video production. They hope one day to make Dear Native Grapes a full-time operation.
Alfie is a freelance director of photography. He's a cameraman. And so his schedule is a bit more flexible, being freelance. He'll jump on and off of jobs as they come up. That way he can spend most of his time here on the farm. But I have a full-time job. I'm fully remote, which is nice that I can still be up here and I can help Alfie out, on weekends or before and after work or whenever I'm free. But I'm usually tied to my computer from 9 to 5 during the weekday.
We're still trying to figure out the farm to work life balance, hustling a little bit still with our other jobs, but, hopefully sometime in the near future, we can devote more time to just the farming and the winemaking.
To learn more about Dear Native Grapes and find out how you can purchase their wines, visit their website, dearnativegrapes.com. I'm Erin Shear. Eating Upstate is a production of WJFF, Radio Catskill.
And thanks to Erin for the latest edition of Eating Upstate. We'll take a break, and when we come back, the Woodstock Film Festival. It opens this week. We'll get a preview. This is Radio Chatskill.